While the immediate shock of the conflict is felt at the pumps and in the skies, the long-term challenge for Kuwait is one of fiscal survival and structural resilience. To navigate the complex economic currents of this war, we are joined in the studio by Dr. Issam Altawari, is an economic expert. Dr. Altawari, thank you very much for being with us in the studio.
Thank you very much for having me.
Dr. Altawari, to begin with, where do we stand today economically as the conflict involving Iran continues to unfold in the region?
Well, basically, it's a big question.
Yeah.
This is now shifting from a military war into an economic war. Basically, the prolonged duration of the conflict between Iran and the US and Israel is having a bigger impact, not only on those two countries, but the region and the global economy as a whole. I mean, as your report just mentioned, you know, the major disruption to the energy market and to the flow of trade out of the Gulf, basically, which has been impacted severely. Now it's not only a conflict that is happening in this small region. The people in North America and Europe, and in Asia, basically they're feeling the impact because of the higher gasoline prices. Basically, it has gone up by more than 20%. So basically, that being said, the impact will have more on the industries, on transportation, on aviation, and this will basically put pressure on global inflation, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
So basically, we all hope that this conflict would end soon, so that, you know, we go back to normalization.
Exactly. How do geopolitical conflicts typically translate into inflation pressures, particularly for countries that rely heavily on imported goods? Well,
let's focus on the Gulf here. We have basically one of the largest oil deposits in the whole world, between Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, UAE, Iraq as well, basically when you have basically the conflict and the stoppage of oil exports into the global markets, which is impacting primarily Southeast Asia for the time being, and increasing the increase in the premium, in the insurance premium for the marine transportation. All of that is having a big impact on the whole global economy. So the geopolitical conflict is becoming far more beyond the region, okay, and therefore what we can see is that the impact is hitting aviation industry, okay. One, you know, there's a disruption to all flights out of the region, plus the increase in the you know, aviation, you know, oil, fuel costs represent around 65% of the operation of any airline. So basically, when you have oil prices going up by about 40%, you know, then this would be reflected on the prices of tickets and the cost of transportation.
Yeah.
Not only that, cargo, air cargo would be impacted, and basically, so the supply chain basically for any industry in different sectors will be impacted as a result of this conflict, and therefore, you know, we hope to see that, you know, de-escalation and ceasefire happening much sooner than later, because, you know, if this conflict goes on for a longer period of time, then this would impact the strategic reserves of oil globally. And so once that gets depleted, this will push prices of oil much higher, which basically will have an impact on global inflation. And then, then you get into a situation where, the global economy would go into what's called stagflation. So you'll have high inflation and low growth at the same time, which is the worst of the worst that could happen to any global economy.
Yes. From a political perspective, how should governments in the Gulf respond economically during periods of regional instability?
Well, the GCC states have taken strict measures to ensure, one, stabilize the situation locally, provide, basically support the financial institutions and liquidity within the institutions, within the Gulf itself. Comforting giving confidence to the people that they're safe in here and being here in the region. The other things that basically they have done is that they became much more transparent in communicating with the people about all the latest developments, just to ensure that there's no room for rumors taking place, which is very, very important during this critical time.
I would like to pause here for a minute because we do have our correspondent Ghada Mansour with us. Ghada, can you hear me? I think there is a technical issue. Okay, we'll be back again. We do have another question. As Kuwait has historically relied on strong fiscal reserves, how important are sovereign wealth funds in protecting national economies during a geopolitical crisis?
When looking at Kuwait specifically, we have two sides to our economy. One is the internal, and the other one is external. The internal is basically all the revenues coming derived from the oil sector, and the other external source is basically our sovereign wealth fund, which is estimated reaching around $1 trillion. So the combination of both is basically what represents the wealth of the country, and this is reflected by the confidence that's being regarded by the market and certified by the rating agencies for having basically financial buffers in case of any economic volatility. The rating agencies recently have actually affirmed the credit rating for the GCC countries about 3 days ago, which reflects the confidence that the situation is under control, the risks are still acceptable, and the countries are doing a great job in maintaining sort of confidence in the economy.
Yes, I think our correspondent Ghada Mansour is with us right now. We would like to pause our conversation. I'll get back later. Ghada Mansour, good evening. Do you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Ghada, can you tell us the latest updates and your location, please?
Thank you, Hamid. Good evening, dear viewers. I'm currently at the Shuwaykh Beach, and as you can see behind me, there is a slight increase of movement and activity compared to the past 2 turbulent weeks. We're now approaching the 3rd consecutive week of the regional unrest, where the state's efforts from the very first day have been proactive, well coordinated, offering swift and rapid responses. For example, His Highness Sheikh Ahmed Abdullah Ahmed al-Sabah, the Prime Minister, may Allah protect him, has been conducting inspection visits on a daily basis to ensure the rapid responses, preparation methods, the sufficiency of equipment, the emergency shelters, and checking up on the injured citizens and residents. For example, also the Red Crescent Society has recently increased the number of volunteers to approximately 400 during these national emergencies and to facilitate the state's efforts. Also, part of the latest preparation measures For the phase after Eid, as we near the end of the holy month of Ramadan, the Civil Service Commission announced the continuation of the 30% capacity in the workforce. The Minister of Education, Sayyid Jalal Tabtabai, also announced the continuation of virtual learning until further notice. So, Hamid, I would just like to stress one more point, that during these times, while the states are doing their efforts, there is a sense of obligation from us as citizens and residents to work in a parallel direction with the state to help mitigate the current situation and to reach a faster sense of de-escalation environment. So the Ministry of Interior continues to stress to obtain your information from official sources, to avoid spreading misinformation, and to comply with the guidelines on their websites and across all the social media platforms. I wish you, dear viewers, the continued safety to all of you and to your families, to our beloved Kuwait, and to our entire GCC member states. Thank you, Hamid.
Thank you very much, Ghada Mansour, our correspondent from KTV2. Returning back to my guest, Dr. Issam Altawari, we do have questions. We do have actually lots of questions. Energy markets are extremely sensitive to conflict in this region. Could prolonged tensions change how global energy markets operate in the long term?
Well, I mean, to put things in perspective, one has to think about the sort of a time frame. If we're looking at a short-term, basically conflict, say basically 3 to 4 weeks, and where you know we're seeing actually oil prices sort of basically spiking up and increasing, and once the dust settles and basically there's a ceasefire, prices will go back to normalization. The second scenario is if this conflict basically continues to be regional, but extends in terms of time frame to say months. Yeah. That would basically keep prices high, and the impact would be much more severe on the global economy. This could basically reduce global growth by around 0.2% on an annual basis, and basically it would basically bring about stagflation, as I mentioned earlier.
Yes.
However, if this basically goes beyond the region, this conflict goes beyond the region and extends in time, then the global economy the whole global economy would witness much more severe impact, and it could change even the perspective of where inflation would go, the prices of currencies, prices of commodities, and so on and so forth.
Dr. Issam Altawari, we often talk about oil prices rising during conflict, but could there also be hidden economic risk even for oil-producing countries?
Well, let's look at, there is a production piece, and there is basically the processing piece, and there is the transportation and export piece. So what we're looking at the whole process of production, process, and transportation. And at the same time, if we're talking about oil, refining oil to oil products, yes, and so on and so forth, that's the refineries and that would have costs associated with it. So the first cost would be cost of disruption, yeah, and basically halting production, basically, and for basically in our case, the KPC has declared force majeure, with basically not able to deliver on their contracts because of reasons beyond the country's control, and therefore we cannot fulfill our side of the supply contracts towards our customers, so that will be loss of revenue. The second thing is basically to resume production. Also, there's it's not like it's like stepping into a car and turning on the ignition where, yeah, everything would start again. Those refineries needs time to basically gets started and goes with the production
the process
in a sequential manner.
Yes.
Okay, and so that takes time as well. The cost associated, of returning back to normality because of all the sort of the feedstock or the imports have increased in prices, it will have an impact on our production prices.
Exactly.
At the same time, as I mentioned earlier, the cost of insuring the exports has gone up by 12 times.
Yes.
Like if you look at, for example, a tanker that with oil value of around 300 million, for example, it used to have an insurance cover of around $500,000. Now it will be insured for $7.5 million. So it just goes to show that the increase, those are the hidden charges or the hidden costs that are associated with the conflict.
In recent years, the Gulf has focused heavily on economic reforms and development visions. Could regional instability slow these transformations plans?
You mentioned the word vision. Vision means it's a long-term sort of project. Long-term projects basically, of course, could be impacted by such eventualities. It could cause delays, what have you. However, those vision projects are projects that are essential and core to the development and the growth of our GCC economies. In the Gulf, we have projects under process of around $950 billion.
Yes.
Okay, between Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, Qatar. These are infrastructure projects or basically major developments of cities, entertainment, tourism, aviation, data centers, and so on and so forth. So yes, they could be impacted in the short term. However, those are core to the economy, and we hopefully when the conflict comes to an end, we could expect or yield the dividends of peace. That's what I like to call it, dividends of peace, where our country and the whole region would see much more growth coming into our economies. Yes, we would have some increase in our deficit gap in our budget, but this could be bridged easily through external borrowings and investing in our infrastructure that would basically translate into a growth of around 2 to 3% over the coming years.
Some analysts warn that prolonged instability in the Middle East could contribute to global economic slowdown. In your perspective, do you see the risk increasing?
Well, of course, as I mentioned earlier, our conflict is not contained in one country. This conflict, the impact of this conflict is having a big impact on the global economy, because essentially our region transports basically around 20% of the oil through Strait of Hormuz, for example. 30% of our oil through Strait of Hormuz, 20% of global gas goes through Strait of Hormuz. And the disruption of that export, will have big impact on our customers in Southeast Asia, for example, China, Korea, India, Japan, and for example, even the byproducts of oil, like sulfur, for example, 50% of the global sulfur goes out of our region, and sulfur basically have fertilizer will be impacted, batteries, electric vehicle batteries would be impacted, I mean, and many other sort of sectors. Therefore, the global economy, yes, will be impacted heavily, is being impacted heavily by that.
Yes. How do international financial institutions and global markets typically react when geopolitical tensions escalate in a region as strategic as the Gulf?
Well, you know, financial institutions, they are very much sort of sensitive to risk, and whether geopolitical risk, market risks, or interest rates risks. And whenever there is a conflict, you know, of course, you know, there's a geopolitical risk that is associated with it, and you know, then this will have an impact on currencies, stock markets, and commodities, basically. We see, I mean, for example, you know, yes, oil prices have gone up. Also, you know, investors would try to do flight to safety, basically,
yes,
and investing in gold and Federal Reserve bonds, or in dollars, for example. And we've seen that the dollars has gone up,
yes,
simply because it's liquid, and therefore we've seen that the global equity markets have suffered as a result of this conflict. And so it's always about investors move from yield to safety. So basically, they would forgo yield for the sake of having sort of safer investments. And once the situation settles, you know, then they shift back into higher risk and more yield sort of mode.
Yes. Looking ahead, what economic lessons should policymakers in the region take from past conflicts when planning for long-term stability and resilience?
Well, this conflict has shown us how important GCC countries need each other, and in terms of security, in terms of coordinating logistics, in terms of making sure that we cover each other's back. So the lessons learned from this conflict is that, you know, we need to really focus on our rail links,
yes,
infrastructure, our highway infrastructure,
yeah,
connecting the GCC for the flow of trade, for the flow of people, and basically making sure that we have alternative routes to the marine routes, looking and considering seriously having basically pipeline for transportation of oil and gas from the Gulf, from the East Coast to the West Coast, or straight southwards towards Oman into the Indian Ocean as an alternative, so that, you know, if in case of such eventuality happens, we will not be stuck in such a situation. Saudi Arabia, over 40 years ago, have basically strategically built the pipeline from Eastern Province to the Western Province into the Yanbu port, basically. So, you know, UAE, they've got their ports on from Fujairah on the eastern side of UAE, overlooking the Gulf of Oman. So they have alternatives for export. However, Iraq, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, we only have one route to for exporting our oil, which is
yes,
through the Strait of Hormuz. So basically, better coordination, looking carefully into alternative modes of transportation and export of our oil, rail links. You know, all of these would be as a joint projects would have a much positive impact on the growth of our region.
Mm-hmm. Could this conflict actually accelerate economic cooperation among Gulf countries as they try to mitigate shared risks?
Sorry, what's the question?
Could this conflict accelerate economic cooperation among Gulf countries as they try to mitigate shared risks?
I think the conflict is putting all of these sort of issues into the test, into the real test, and ensuring that we would look at stronger, closer coordination between the GCC countries and acting more like a one unit, because this conflict has proven that we, by standing, supporting each other,
yes,
we're seeing positive results in terms of stability into our region, stability into our own countries, the safety of our citizens and residents. And honestly, even those who've chosen to move out of the region, they, it was an orderly sort of transfer for them, and there were no big issues or hazard to their safety, and we here, like for example, as you can see, and this report has just shown,
yes,
people are going by their life in a normal way. So
yes,
there is no panic, there is no yeah, of course, people would have to be more careful during these sort of turbulent time. However, people are getting along with their lives as normal, and which is basically a reflection of what the government has done, what the GCC countries have been doing amongst each other, which is giving comfort to the people to feel safe in their own countries.
Okay. How might currency markets and exchange rates be affected if regional tensions continue?
Well, I mean, currencies reflect risks, and what we've seen so far, like for example, US dollar and Swiss francs has basically became stronger,
yeah,
because they're liquid, they're safer currencies. The euro and for example, and the British pound, because it's reliant on energy from this region, has suffered as a result. We're not going to talk about the big impact that has affected the Iranian rial, which has been suffering and even suffered even more as a result of this conflict. I mean, the currency is becoming next to nothing, basically. Our currency is a KD because it's a composition of a basket of currencies, which reflects the trade flows between Kuwait and its major trade partners. Probably more than 50% of that is US dollars. The rest is euro, yen, and other currencies. Our currencies have been more or less stable during this turbulent time, and so basically, which gives us a great comfort as a result.
Do crises like this tend to push governments towards more conservative fiscal policies?
Well, I think the GCC countries would, once this conflict comes to an end, they will have much more expansionary policy. Why? Because we aim to grow our economies, and we would like to basically see foreign direct investment flowing into the region, and we'd like to see much more growth into our, given the major projects, the giga projects that are being undertaken in the region, and therefore I think we'll be seeing much more expansionary policy in the region.
Could the conflict influence global investment strategies toward emerging markets in general?
Well, emerging markets are a category of investment. It just depends on the global mood of finance within the global markets. We stand to benefit from global flows of international investors into our economies as emerging markets, and we see that reflected in the more transparency and into our stock markets. And yes, emerging markets will continue to be a sought after sort of asset class.
From an economist's perspective, what would be the most worrying scenario if the conflict expands further?
Well, we don't want to talk about if that conflict goes on forever. We're hoping this would end soon.
Yes.
I mean, because the prolonged time of the conflict would have would add 2.5% into global inflation rate, which is currently standing around 2%. So 6.5% would bring the global economy into a slowdown and depression. And that's something everybody tries to avoid, and therefore, the Trump administration, they continuously say, well, this is going to be a fast and precise conflict, basically. So nobody wants to see this dragging on for a long time.
We hope everything ends sooner and peacefully, actually, to live in peace and to get to our normal lives. Dr. Issam Altawari, thank you very much for being with us, and thank you more for this informative dialogue that we had. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be back after this break.